It's good to know.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first audit committee of this year. Do we have any apologies, Brian?
We've got one apology, convener, from Councillor Hannah.
Okay. Do we have any declarations of interest from anyone? Nope. Okay. Item 3, we'll go on to the minutes. Has everyone read the minutes, and does anyone have any questions? Or are we happy to agree?
Happy to agree, convener.
Thank you. Thank you. And we'll go on to item 4, which I believe, Isabel, you're presenting.
Yeah. Morning, everybody. So this is the internal audit progress report. The purpose of the report is to provide an update on where we are with completing our 22-23 internal audit plan. The plan was only agreed by committee in November. Paragraph 4.1 sets out the workload, including the other client work that we undertake. A summary of progress relating to the 21 assignment areas is at Appendix 1. Paragraph 4.3 summarises what audit reports have been completed, are in progress and are still to be started. Appendix 2 summarises the findings arising from assignments that have been finalised via an internal audit report. Paragraph 4.4 highlights that 7 internal audit report recommendations remain outstanding beyond their agreed implementation date. Appendix 3 provides details of these recommendations. On a quarterly basis, internal audit identify what look like duplicate creditor payments. We then investigate these results to confirm if they are actually overpayments. The last quarter results can be seen at paragraph 4.5. Following a question from members at the last audit committee, paragraphs 4.6 and 4.7 provide an update on the actions taken to ensure that support and documentation has been held. Internal audit plan to undertake sample checks on recent transactions to provide further assurance in this area. So I'd ask members to note the recommendations and the conclusions. That is, that the team are making good progress with completing the 22-23 internal audit plan. Members should also note the current number of outstanding recommendations, the actions taken regarding the duplicates, and the action taken in response to the member queries from the last audit committee in November. If you have any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. Councillor Meikle-John.
Thank you, convener. I've got a couple of questions. One is obviously related to the outstanding works. Obviously, we've got 5 completed, 7 still to be completed, with 2 reviews yet to be started. And we have a new plan, and it's really about the capacity going forward and to whether or not we will be able to do catch up and actually deliver on our plan within agreed timescales. If I'll just give all the questions at once, convener, that might help and allow officers to come back. The other question specific to that is in relation to the fleet management, the follow-up in stage 2, and to when that's likely to be completed, because we know there were concerns in relation to that. Section 4.5, where we have the duplicate or duplicate payments. Actually, my question actually was more related to the COVID payments. Is compared to other councils, are we in a similar position? Has there been any comparisons done with other local authorities in relation to that? And that we're not an outlier is really what I'm looking, because others must be in a similar position. So I'll leave it at that just now, convener.
Isabel, do you wish to respond, please?
Yeah, of course. So the first one on the delivery of the plan, you're quite right to say that obviously there's still a bit of work to be done there. There are actually only 2 audits to be started. The rest are, in fact, one of them has actually already been issued as a final, and we've got another 2 that are almost ready to go out as final. So I'm not concerned that that those reports are going to be way behind. Obviously, yes, you're right. The words you used there were catch up, and that's exactly what we've been doing over the last 2 years, basically. We did have some resource issues over the last 2 years where a couple of members of staff moved on, and then that meant there were vacancies in the team that had to be filled. Those vacancies weren't easy initially to fill, and we got there, and that's been a great help to us. And then I had a period of sick absence, which wasn't helpful either. So we have been playing catch up to try and make sure that all the work has been undertaken, because at one point we actually only had 2 auditors in the team who were still trying to provide this audit service to the standard that we wanted to. So, as I said in the report, we only started this plan, it only came to you in November, so we have got quite a lot of the way through it. And what we are doing now is trying to play that catch up by bringing everything back in line after the pandemic to make sure that our plans are going at the right time, which is now, that's why you've got the plan now, so that we're trying to get back in line with where we were. So I think in answer to that question, yes, we're in a relatively good place because we actually only have the 2 reports that we've still to start. One of them is your second question, and that just goes quite nicely into that, because the 2 that were deferred into next year's programme, which is the next report, is around fleet, and that is the phase 2 work. And I just said a couple of minutes ago that there were a couple of reports that were ready to go out as final just in the next week or 2. This is the next audit after that. Once we've got these cleared, the fleet audit is the next one that we're starting on. So that will cover that one. The third one around COVID. We did do a lot of work with other councils in comparison at the time, in particular to the problem that we had with the transactions not being stored. That was particular to us because it was our Integra system where the information wasn't being held. It's not that the information wasn't available and hadn't been getting authorised, it just hadn't maybe been stored because we had changed the way we were working through COVID. So we do a lot of comparisons with other councils, but this was a particular issue that we had that we've now tried to cover off, and making sure that the paperwork is being added. Hopefully that answers the questions.
Thank you, Isabel. Does any other member have any questions? Councillor Spears.
Like so. 4.7 elected members were recently provided with an update for the accountancy from the accountancy manager. I don't think I've received that. First question.
Yeah, there was an email response went back via the Democratic Services Manager. There was responses sent back to the members in the committee.
I certainly haven't received it. Can a hard copy be sent out?
I would admit, yeah.
So I can await that. Second question, have we done an audit on the underspend on emergency payments for people over COVID and in hardship? It came up at the executive committee that there had been a very small uptake and there was a large pot of money waiting. Have we audited how we went about actually identifying getting cash to these people?
No, that isn't a specific audit that we did. At the time through COVID, we did a lot of assurance work and verifying of all the funding that was going out. But that isn't something that's been specifically looked at.
It's maybe something we need to look at rather urgently due to present recession.
I believe there was a report to that from on the executive. Karen, do you wish to comment on that?
Yes, thank you, convener. That was covered at the executive last week, and it was in the scheme of things, it was a small uptake underspend for those due the payment. But as Sally Buchanan highlighted, that the executive were looking at other methods of getting that payment to those individuals, whether that be direct payments to pay for example, some monies that are due on water tax, council tax, etc. So there are other mechanisms that are being considered for that already to make sure that anyone who is due that payment would receive that payment. And that was part of a report on tackling poverty and maximising income, as was discussed last week. Thank you, convener.
Can I ask Ms Algie then when the advertisement for this will be coming out?
Convener, through yourself, this is a payment that's been around for some time now, so it's been well advertised. It's not that it's not been advertised, there's been a lot of information. As you would have seen from the report to the executive last week, there were also letters sent to anyone who was due to receive this, and information was passed to them. So a lot of that work has already been done, but some individuals have not contacted the council to receive the payment, and that's the area where we're following up and trying to make sure that anyone who was due would receive it. Thank you.
It's just that the area need is greatly expanded. It expands every week as more and more people go into poverty.
Is there any other questions from anyone else? Councillor Meikle-John.
Could I come back, convener? It was relation to the EPIAs. That is obviously something that was flagged up in our best value report, just around our approach to qualities. And while there has been some work done and on producing and making sure we're producing our EPIAs, I just wondered if there's something more that we could be doing to maybe embed that in the reports coming forward to ensure that there's an EPIA attached to all reports that where it's appropriate to help inform members as their decision making.
Thank you, Councillor Meikle-John. That'd be helpful. Karen.
Yep. Thanks, convener. Have to come in on that point. Yeah, it's a very good point, and it's something that we are now working to do to try and make sure that any report that is where an EPIA is required would have that prior to coming to members for consideration, so that you've got that. In addition, there's work getting done, and that's why this is an outstanding recommendation, because there's work getting done to review the EPIA process. So we do have better arrangements in place for completion, but we want to actually review the EPIA forums, and we're also planning to do some additional training for officers and members on the EPIAs. We've already done a piece of training for elected members. There's some more training that we have planned for that. Some of that will follow on as well from a refresh of the actual EPIA document once that's done. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Councillor Meikle-John, not happy with that?
Yes, I was just wondering if it's something that could be considered as part of a review of standing orders, so that we have something more prescriptive to ensure that we're complying with that going forward.
Does anyone else have any? Sorry, Karen.
Oh, sorry, convener. Convener, I was
Go
just
ahead.
going to say through yourself, if that's absolutely fine, and I will actually ask for that to be built into a review of standing orders, no problem at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Do we have any other questions? Okay, move on to the next item then, please.
That
Which
be
I
me?
believe is, yep, I believe the internal audit plan, yep.
Yeah, that's right. So the second report from internal audit today sets out the proposed programme of work for 23-24 for approval. The resources we've got available for delivering our planned programme of work are set out at the table at paragraph 5.4. This takes account of the joint working agreement with Clackmannanshire Council, details of which are set out in paragraph 4.1. There's a separate internal audit plan which is approved by Clackmannanshire Council elected members for them. Paragraphs 4.2 and 4.3 also provide an update on the resource issues that were faced in the last year. The plan is split into 3 categories. The first one being annually recurring assignments that are pieces of work that we commit to doing on a rolling annual basis. Most of these are either externally driven or they're regulatory reviews. Number 2 is our committed assignments, which are the audits we commit to completing every year. And then there is other client work, which is the audit work that we undertake for other clients under the Falkirk Council umbrella. Further details can be found at paragraph 5.5. The assignments that make up each element of the plan are set out at appendices 1 to 3. I've tried to give a little bit of detail on what the scope for each is likely to be, though it may change once we start properly planning each assignment over the course of the year. The process for planning, undertaking and reporting on each individual assignment is the same as previous years and is set out at paragraphs 5.7 to 5.11. Paragraph 5.12 highlights that each year an internal audit annual assurance report is presented to committee. Internal audit gives an overall opinion on the Council's risk management, governance and control arrangements, and it's based on the work that internal audit has carried out over the course of the year, and that will come to the next audit committee in June. The report will also include a summary of all the work undertaken in 22-23. So to finish, I draw your attention to the recommendations at paragraph 2.1. In particular, can I ask that committee approves the internal audit plan for the year, but to bear in mind the resources available to internal audit and the need for the plan to be flexible. Internal audit will direct resources to where they're most needed, and progress will be reported to audit committee on an ongoing basis. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Councillor Meikle-John.
Thank you, convener. Obviously, just a follow-on question from the previous is about do we have the resource to be able to meet our plan, and is there likely to be any adverse impact of the work that we're doing with external organisations such as Strathcarron and Clackmannan, where I appreciate we do get a fee for that, but that should not compromise our work. And just a wee bit more information and understanding of the reciprocal audit review with West Lothian Council and to what it is we're looking to achieve out of that as we go forward. Thanks, Katrina.
Thank you, Councillor Meikle-John. Isabel?
Yep, that's okay. So yeah, the resources, it is always a balancing act, especially because we do the other work. It would be wrong of me to say otherwise. We still have enough resources in there to provide good coverage for Falkirk Council, and you're right to say we do get a fee, so we are generating an income from both Clackmannanshire Council and from Strathcarron Hospice. This probably leads me right into your second question. In terms of the Falkirk Council umbrella, the only other client work that's affected is the hospice, because Clackmannanshire does have a separate plan. So there is a division of resources over the two, but you'll see from the plan that's there, we have good coverage, we have a good number of audits. And part of what I was just saying in my intro there was around the annual assurance that we have to provide. So we have more than enough there in terms of types of audits, length of audits, complexity of audits, the focus being risk-based. We have more than enough there to cover the requirements for our annual assurance report. So that probably answers a bit of 1 and 2. The third one you asked was about West Lothian. So internal audit as a whole is an independent function, because in order to do our work we have to be independent of all the other services, and the only thing really that we can audit within the council is ourselves, and the risk function sits with me. So West Lothian are in that same position. So we set up a reciprocal agreement a number of years ago where we audit that function for each other to provide that independence still. So it's to give you an added layer of assurance that where our risk function is. That audit is being undertaken just now and is on at draft report stage, and we're just going through the findings just now. So that report will be like every other report, and it will come to a future audit committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have questions? Councillor Spears?
Thank you. Appendix 1, consultancy work and income generation. Can you tell me if we are auditing external groups that are using this for consultancy reasons, especially with consulting the public? And also, is there a list on income generation, especially on assets? As you know, we're going through an asset realisation process at the moment, and these figures would be very interesting for elected members and the general public who may wish to take these assets on.
Isabel?
Yeah. The consultancy and income generation is more about the function of internal audit. So we're always trying to look for those opportunities to maximise the income that we bring in. So in this context, it is around the work that we do with Clackmannanshire Council and the hospice. Both of those contracts have been up for renewal, and we've been doing quite a lot of work negotiating to try and get those new contracts set up, which I'm able to tell you that we're in the process of doing that. And with regards to your second part of your question about assets, again, it's more about consultancy with services within the council, and indeed with our other organisations that we work with, and it's about providing advice and consultancy for maybe projects. It's not this area of work isn't specifically to deal with audits. It's about that wider picture.
And my first question regarding consultancy work.
Yeah, that was it. That was about the consultancy that we do, rather than some of your question is around the consultancy with the public. If we are doing an audit, we will look to see what consultancy has been done as part of that audit, if that was part of the scope of that audit. But internal audit specifically would not be necessarily looking to consult with the public. Our information is like here because it's a public, it's in the public domain. Yeah. I know I'm not really answering your question, but I don't think it's really a question for me.
Okay, maybe for the Director of Development Services or the Financial Director. I know we've had a particular consultancy ongoing for 5 years.
Thanks, Convener. Where assignments are not
answering the question, no?
I think she's already said it wasn't in her remit to answer
There,
fully, other than what she's already given you.
Director of Finance and of Development Services.
It's maybe helpful, Convener, just that what's referred to in the report and what's therefore relevant for the committee is the consultancy and income generation for internal audit, and that's what Isabel was explaining, that's the work, the consultancy work they do.
Yeah.
The wider how council consults and how we look at that isn't a matter for this committee. It may be for other committees, but it's not for this one. So I think you're correct to say that.
Well, we should maybe change the heading if it's internal audit and we're here to as a scrutiny committee, which you previously mentioned at the pre-meetings, and the question is on consultancy work, then I'm a wee bit lost why we're here then.
I think the convener made it. It's quite clear. convener, and I think you said you were happy to move
It's
on.
obviously not clear to everybody.
Well, there's only so much you can do, convener.
Thank you, Brian. Councillor Forrest.
Thank you, convener. Where assignments are not all services, there are 9 assignments, 4 of which are for police services, with only 1 for children's services, by far the largest service. It would be interesting to hear the basis on which these assignments have been chosen.
Yeah, of course. So every year the plan is developed to try and give broad coverage over lots of different areas and for different reasons. The audits are risk-based, so we look at what's high risk on the corporate risk register. We look at what has been audited before in terms of how long ago, how often does it need to be audited? Was it a limited assurance, therefore it would probably benefit from another audit? And you'll see that that has to be balanced out with the resources that we have, which in part takes me back to the earlier question about, do we have enough resources? You could never, you could never have enough resources. If you've got the resources, you can do more audits. That's the bottom line. But our audits are a mix, because we also do quite big, complicated audits. We do audit work that comes in throughout the year. The fleet services audit that was referred to earlier is one of those where there was work done, there were particular issues, and we've repeatedly gone back to try and provide that extra assurance. So we're always trying to balance in and fit in where things are important. We map all the different areas out and try to get that, try and prioritise them into types of like transactional testing audits, bigger systems audits, and it's always subject to change, because anything could happen within the year that would change that, something else could happen. But obviously at this point, these were with the resources that we have, the best audits that we could come up with to give the coverage over all the different things that we need to. I hope that answers. Thanks.
Thank you, that's very helpful, very informative. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? I just have one very small question regarding to page 12 of the report. Energy Bills Support Scheme. How well was this publicised? Because it's the first I've heard of it.
This work, like a lot of the work through the pandemic, we were advised from government as to our role and what that would be. Guidance comes out from Scottish Government, or in this case UK Government, as to how we've to work and deal with those applications. So it was late, I think, when it was set up. There were different, you'll see that there are 2 different options there. It has been publicised. Our role is slightly different in this time compared to the work that we've done in the past, because we had to use our own systems in previous grant funding. Whereas this funding, there is a system that the UK Government have set up and established, and we are providing a lot of the background around that, and then that's how we're making the payments. It has been publicised, and the work is still happening. We're still dealing with the applications. It's still open for a number of weeks, I think. So, but it is peaks and troughs a little bit, and I think it is as people are finding out and becoming more aware of it. But it is people who are obviously off the grid, and we'll be hearing about it from various means.
Thank you, Isabel. Does anyone else have anything else? Okay, we're happy to agree that item. Okay, let's move on to the next one then, please.
Thank you, convener. I think that's me that's picking up this item 6. So it's the corporate risk management update, And so the report in front of you presents an update on the corporate risk register and an update on the risk management improvement plan. And I'll just take you through some of the kind of key points of the report, if that's okay. So section 5 of the report shows a summary of the changes that have been made to the corporate risk register. There's a more detailed summary included at Appendix 1, and then there's also hyperlinks at paragraph 5.1 that take you to the detail behind the detail, if you like. There's 4 new risks which have been added to the corporate risk register. Those have all been rated high at this time, and they're summarised at table 5.2. So the lead officers for those risks are working on the templates for the corporate risk register, which will include developing smart action plans to support the management and the mitigation of the risks. And there's 1 risk relating to early years expansion, which has been removed from the corporate risk register. Paragraph 5.4 of the report notes that a number of risks continue to be high risks, and many of those are scored with having a limited assurance. But there are risks within Appendix 1 where we're expecting the target date to be met that will help that high risk move to medium. But one of the key things that we need to look at is set out in paragraph 5.6, which is about ensuring measurable action plans are in place for each risk. I took a report to CMT a few weeks ago, and we've discussed this with directors to ensure that work's undertaken and to make sure that measurable action plans are in place for each of our high corporate risks. If I move on to the risk management improvement plan, there's some commentary on that set out from paragraph 5.7, and good progress has been made to date. And that work will feed into the annual governance statement, and Isabel will shortly present a progress report on the annual governance statement action plan. And a summary of some of those areas of progress are included in the bullet point list at paragraph 5.8. As I've already noted, I think the key issue that we need to work on is the development of those measurable action plans to manage and mitigate the risks on the corporate risk register. We do have action plans, it's just maybe a bit of sort of quality control and improving those action plans wherever we can. We have also said that we would carry out horizon scanning sessions with officers and members, and we're hoping to do that before the end of June this year. And as we've already been discussing, the West Lothian audit is coming to conclusion, and we'll pick up any recommendations flowing from that and consider those. And finally, I would draw the committee's attention to the proposed changes to the reporting timetable for corporate risk. And apologies, I think in rereading the report over the weekend, the proposals in the body of the report is not as clear as they could be, but they are set out in the recommendations, and it's number 4 in the recommendations. So just to summarise, the proposed plans are to continue our quarterly updates on corporate risk to CMT, and those will cover the risks as well as our processes and our improvement plan. To take an annual corporate risk management update to audit committee and 6 monthly annual governance statement updates. And then to take 6 monthly reports to executive, which will focus on the risk register, risk management improvement plan, and horizon scanning. And the point behind those proposals is that those better reflect the roles and responsibilities of each of the bodies as set out in the risk management framework, which was agreed by audit last year and went to executive in December last year. So that's a very brief summary of all those of the report. Obviously, my colleagues are here from each of the services if anyone has a query on any individual risks. And thank you, convener. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Amanda. Councillor Meikle-John.
Thank you, convener. A couple of questions and just a couple of comments. Just a wee bit of confusion, I think, in the way it's reported, Amanda, and I'm seeking a bit of clarification of where we've got areas where we have substantial assurance and limited assurance. So it's understanding which is it, or is the actual risk needing to be broken down into two areas. So I think we need to have a wee look at that and how that could be clearer. The other aspect is around major projects. I'm thinking of like the growth deal, etc., and the risk registers around that, and to how that is going to be fed in. I mean, I'm from my memory, I'm sure it is in the annual report from the corporate risk register. But this is my comment, and it's not for answering today, but something to consider, that prior to the corporate risk register coming to audit committees, if there was able to be an informal or a briefing meeting where we could have a look at the corporate risk register, look at the mitigations, understand the movement, and therefore the risks associated with that, which I think would maybe help us understand the management updates as they come forward, because I think at the moment this seems a wee bit detached from the corporate risks there, and I just ask maybe a bit of consideration is given to that. Thank you, Convener.
Amanda.
Thank you, Convener. I tend to agree. We actually had this discussion at CMT about these kind of mixed assurance statements, and I suppose it's trying to strike a balance, and I think maybe we're not quite there and we need to sort of think it through a little bit, but it's trying to strike a balance, for example, to say that we are making progress, things are improving, but we've still got work to do, and I think it's just how we document that. And so happy to continue looking at that, and I don't know if any of the information from West Lothian Council's review might inform how we present some of this information, but I do understand the point that you've made, and as I say, we have been discussing it at CMT as well in terms of how we could potentially improve that going forward. In terms of the projects, Malcolm may want to come in and see something else, but we do have delivery of major capital investment, including the growth deal, as a standalone risk on the corporate risk register. It is currently rated high, and we have a target to get it to medium. Now, each of those projects that sits behind that, so if I think about, for example, TIF, or I think about flood protection, you know, there's a separate governance structure, there's a separate board, there's separate very detailed risk registers that sit behind that, and all of those should be feeding into our assessment of where we are with that corporate risk. And then finally, I think you referred to the briefing and the meeting, and I'm certainly happy to consider again how we progress this. I mean, I think in terms of the changes that we've proposed to reporting on risk, we have tried to sort of reflect that the audit committee's terms of reference are about the framework and the processes and the structure around risk, and the executive's terms of reference are around the review and the agreement of the actual risks themselves. And so it's trying to find a mechanism, I suppose, that would help both committees to fulfil their functions. I'm certainly happy to take that away and think about it further.
Thank you, Amanda. Do we have any other questions? Councillor Spears.
Thank you. 5.2, decreased risks that you have improved. Early years expansion in school meals. Does this include safe routes to schools, and especially as there is a proposal to extend the distance for free school transport, especially early mornings, young kids, early years kids travelling to school at some 3 miles for school breakfasts? Can you tell me if that's included in this?
Oh, Gary may want to come in there.
Okay, through your convener, just to answer Councillor Spear's question, it doesn't include the risks associated with that because those risks will be contained in the committee report that's been prepared just now to come to a future meeting in one of the executive committees. The decreased risks relate to the fact that the early years expansion is complete relative to the intentions that were set out by the Scottish Government to increase hours to 1,140 hours per annum, and we've done that successfully across Falkirk. And the school meal expansion refers to the universal provision of free school meals being rolled out to primary school aged children up to primary 5 just now. And again, that's been successfully done throughout the Falkirk area. So it's only right and proper that, as referred to earlier on, the risks are reviewed continually, and in this case, these risk ratings have been reduced, which is good news.
Yeah, I thought the Director of Development Services might come in on safe routes to school.
Councillor Spears, I don't think this is for this meeting.
Second question. 5.53, health and safety remains. Now you go on 5.6. That there is clear plans to the risks. So you're saying it's not for this meeting, but this is, we're handling risk here. Would you recommend which meeting to bring up the health and safety of our children going to school?
Convener, we're in danger of going into a debate on a paper with all the information we don't have in front of us. The officer has said that that's coming to a future meeting of the Education, Children and Young People's Executive, and that would be the place for those questions, I would say.
I know that paper, there was a paper brought forward that's been withdrawn. Is the paper being radically altered then? There's
no paper being brought forward. I think you may be confusing the matter with the school pools, which has been delayed, and it will be coming back to a special full council.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Patrick.
Convener, I'm looking at also at 5.5.3, pointing out that there has been limited assurance since 2018 on a number of quite significant areas. And the report does point out at 5.6 that lead officers need to ensure that clear action plans are in place. And you just wonder if there is any sort of target that can be aimed for in some of these topics, particularly health and safety, business continuity, or I'm just maybe concerned that things slightly drag along. If that's 5 years and they've still been as limited assurance. So just maybe some background or some kind of input on where officers are going with those areas.
Karen.
Thank you, Convener. I'm happy to come in the health and safety one, and maybe other officers can come in the other two. But certainly for the health and safety risk, that has indeed been high risk since 2018. There was a piece of work done over 2018-19, but then delayed in 2020 due to the COVID work, and our health and safety team moved away from the work on the action plan to deal with specific areas of work directly linked to ensuring that our services were safe over the COVID period. But the committee is absolutely right that we now need to pick this up, and we have indeed done that. So there was an action plan. Since this report was written, you'll see reference to an action plan coming to CMT. That's now actually been done. That was taken to CMT in March this year. That's been signed off by CMT for health and safety. We have also arranged, the team has also met with all services to develop specific service action plans and also performance indicators for those services. So since the start of this year, I would say that good progress has been made, and we just need to keep continuing with that work now and then implement those action plans. So I hope that helps, certainly on the health and safety one. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Do we have any other questions? Okay, Mr. Benny.
Thank you, through you, convener. Just to say, with regards to business continuity, I can only talk on that since my arrival in January 2022. We've got an active manager in that role who's making a number of significant improvements, and obviously Douglas Gardner was appointed to the head of service role in recent months, and together we are working through the action plan that is listed in the documents in front of you. So I totally take on board the feedback from Councillor Patrick, and would like to reassure her that we are addressing those issues, and I'm happy to provide further updates to elected members as we make our way through that.
Thank you, Malcolm. I have one small question myself regarding the climate change. Climate plans are unfunded. It says there's no assurance on delivering. Can I ask why and when we're liable to have any information on this, please?
Through you, convener. This is a sort of statement of fact, if you like. The report that came forward to I forget if it was executive or council in autumn last year, highlighted that to deliver fully on the council's aspirations to meet its climate change targets, we would need a capital investment in the region of 80 to 100 million pounds, and that money does not exist within the council's existing capital plan, and therefore it would be inaccurate for the risk level to show anything other than a red, in that unless the position changes with significant funding available, then we will not be able to deliver on the climate change aspirations. And that's not to say that we won't still make good positive progress towards reducing our carbon footprint, and you'll have seen recent press releases on the electric vehicles that have arrived, and obviously the strategic property review will also reduce the carbon emissions for the council. So progress will be made, but we won't be able to meet the aspirations in full unless the council provides sufficient funding.
Thank you, Malcolm. Does anyone else have any other questions?
I have another question. If it's
I don't know if Mr. Greenhorn wants to come in, but he's still got his hand up.
Mr. Greenhorn.
Okay, thanks, convener. Convener, just as the other two colleague directors also said, that in terms of the 553 bullet point 3, the reference to contest and the current prevent working group, just to say that we do recognise that there's been delays, quite rightly as pointed out here, in finalising terms of reference and action plan, etc., for the reasons given before, mainly because of the focus on the COVID recovery. However, it does say that we intend to put it right, and we're working with the corporate risk coordinator to develop those in the second quarter of 2023, and we are currently aim to have that completed then. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Spears.
Thank you. It's on Appendix 2, 2.2, horizon scanning. Can you expand on this? As you say, it's an area of limited assurance.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Thank you. I was just going to say, I think that this is about how are our processes robust enough to make sure that we're actively and regularly undertaking horizon scanning to then go through and update our corporate risk registers and our service risk assurance statements. I think our view is that we're not as slick at that as we should be, and so it is part of our risk management improvement plan, and we have said, I think I maybe referred to earlier, that by the end of June we would be aiming to have a workshop with some of our chief officers and members to look at horizon scanning. Horizon scanning is part of the terms of reference for the executive to look at new and emerging risks, and we in the terms of reference for the executive, we say that they will look at it at least once a year. But I don't think we have been as diligent as we could be in making sure that we've undertaken that piece of work with members of the executive. So this is about getting a more robust process in place, which is regularly undertaken. I suppose where I would take some assurance is that we have recognised, we've updated the corporate risk register, we've added 4 new risks on for the areas that we know are things that are, getting discussed regularly at CMT, things that services are flagging up as potential risks or things that are taking up a lot of resource. So I think the work is undertaken, it's just sort of formalising it and making sure all the right people are involved in it. Thank you.
I would suggest maybe the directors look at their inboxes for inquiries from elected members. That would give them a clear picture of what's on the horizon, but what's happening just now.
Okay, no more questions? If not, are we happy to agree this item? Thank you. Moving on to the next item, please.
Hi, you're back to me. Thanks, Convener. So the purpose of this report is to provide an update on actions which were set out within the 21-22 annual governance statement, or AGS as we tend to call it, action plan. So the AGS forms part of the annual accounts every year, and the AGS last year, which was part of the 21-22 annual accounts, included an action plan. It was agreed at Audit Committee in October there that the action plan would be reviewed to monitor the progress that was being made. So paragraphs 4.1 and 4.2 summarise this, and they explain that this work will feed into this year's AGS, which will form part of the 22-23 annual accounts. Appendix 1 summarises the position with each action. Paragraphs 5.1 to 5.4 set out how the action plan has been developed. These updates have been provided by lead officers in each area, and it's based on their progress updates on the corporate risk register as at March of this year. So to finish, I'd ask members to note the recommendations and conclusions. That is that members are asked to note progress with the planned actions and to seek further assurance from or ask questions of chief officers on the progress with the 21-22 annual governance statement action plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. Councillor Meikle-John.
Thank you. Again, it's a similar comment that we've got substantial and limited assurance. Again, I think it's about being able to clarify that. But there's a number of outstanding plans that were to be developed that still to come forward, such as the Gifts and Hospitality Register, the Equalities and Mainstreaming Report due the end of the month. Is that going to be delivered? And where is that going to go? Does that come back at all to the Audit Committee? Do they get sight of it? But I think it's important that we make sure that we've got timescales for some of these plans and make sure that we're able to bring them back, because it has been outstanding for some time. Thanks, Convener.
Karen.
Thank you, Convener. On the 2 reports there that were mentioned, certainly the Equalities Mainstreaming Report, that will be published by the end of this month. It's not a report that would normally go to committee, it would simply be published, but if it's a report that members would be interested in, I can certainly arrange for that to be circulated around certainly Audit Committee or wider if members wish that. In terms of the Gifts and Hospitality, Convener, it's fair comment that has been delayed. The aim is to get that, and it would go to the Executive Committee for agreement. So the aim is to get that to Executive Committee before the summer recess. I hope that helps. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Councillor Spears.
Yes, page 41, financial 7.1. You say there is no there are no direct financial implications linked to recommendations regarding non-delivery of projects and policies. Can you expand on the projects and policies? Because I know there's a lot of outstanding projects, especially in Grangemouth, that we're greatly concerned about, and we're greatly concerned about the non-delivery.
Amanda, sorry, I can't see your hand. It's off the bottom of the screen. Go ahead.
Okay, so there's no direct financial implications which are linked to the recommendations. The recommendation being for the committee to note the paper. So there's no financial implication of noting the paper. But the second sentence in paragraph 7.1 is just reflecting the fact that across everything that we do as a council, we need good and robust risk management, and that risk management will support delivery of projects. So it's not about any individual policy or project, it's just making the point that there can be a financial implication to non-delivery of projects and policies, and that effective risk management should help to stop that. So there's nothing there's no specific project in mind in terms of that wider comment.
Thank you, Amanda. Councillor Forrest.
Thank you, convener. Page 47. Page 47, transformational change. I'd like to ask when the AI report would be finalised. I think that will be for Isabel. Yeah. And I've got a second one, but it's for Malcolm, so I'll get him in a second.
Okay, give us the first question first then.
Yeah, no problem. So that is one of the audits I spoke about earlier. So it's been a very complicated, big piece of work, that audit, and it's at draft report stage. It's been through lots of different officers to get the conclusion, because we looked at a number of projects, and that's one of the ones I spoke about earlier that will be being issued as final in a couple of weeks, and it will come back via this committee once it's been finalised.
Thank you, Isabel. My next question, P50, resilience and business continuity. The timescales for producing the business continuity improvement plan was March 23, and it's not been implemented. When will it be finalised and implemented, please?
Through you, convener. Apologies, I don't have that information with me, but I'll ensure that I speak to Douglas and we get that update provided to you and the other members of the committee as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you, Malcolm.
Do you have any other questions? Councillor Patrick.
Convener, I'm looking at page 46 under the heading of gender-based violence. Now that's given a limited assurance. There's some recognition of that in the notes, so I'm really just wondering why and where we're going with that. Is there a reason? Is it because of the nature of the topic? Just perhaps some further background, please, about our progress in that area.
Karen.
Yes, thank you, convener. I think it's fair to say we've done a reasonable amount of work on this, but there are increases out in the community of gender-based violence that we can see. So we know we need to put more support in place there. And as we mentioned earlier in committee, you'll see that that's been added to our risk register as a high risk. So there's an action plan being developed to take that forward. And we're also looking at a dedicated officer to specifically provide support in that particular area so that we can make good progress in terms of supporting the community on that basis. But if Councillor Patrick would like more detail, I'm happy to get that at a later date, if that's okay.
Does anyone else have? I have one small question regarding legal duties, health and safety, and the fact that we've had HSC notices. I note here that you're saying KPIs are currently being developed and an improvement plan has been drafted. Is there any plans for the KPIs to be included in updated reports in future? Apologies, page 44. Go ahead, Karen.
Thank you, Convener. These KPIs were the ones that I referred to earlier that our health and safety team are working with all services to develop. So those would then be put in place and monitored as part of our normal health and safety practices and monitoring arrangements. Happy to share those with committee once these are available, but certainly it's something that I would anticipate that our audit team would be looking at to review our performance on health and safety, and it's certainly something that will flow in to our assessment of our health and safety corporate risk and whether we are still sitting at high or whether we've made improvements to that risk. So via that mechanism and the reporting of the risk, that will in some way come back to the audit committee, if that makes sense, Convener. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Do we have any other questions?
Convener, can I just ask through my ignorance, perhaps as a new councillor, but what is a KPI?
Key performance indicator.
Thank you.
Sorry. Does any other questions? Are we happy to agree the report?
Agreed.
Then I say we move on to the next one, please.
Thanks, Convener. You'll be glad to know it's the final one from me for today. So the purpose of the report is to provide an update on the work of the corporate fraud team. It's included a corporate fraud action plan. If I take you through the report, there's a range of documents which were detailed and which provided a framework for fraud-related issues that have been reviewed. Paragraph 5.2 sets out the position with the two remaining documents. We've just actually spoken about that one. Paragraph 5.3 highlights the fraud reporting framework previously agreed, and specifically the need to balance the protection of public monies, the rights of employees, and the protection of whistleblowers. Appendix 1 provides members with the corporate fraud team activity for the year 22-23. I would also ask members to note that the corporate fraud team have met or exceeded their target for all three performance indicators. Details can be found at paragraphs 5.6 to 5.7. At the previous audit committee meeting, members agreed the introduction of a corporate fraud action plan, but asked for a couple of tweaks to that document. We did that. That's at paragraph 5.8. These improvements in progress with the corporate fraud action plan are at appendix 2. I'd finally draw your attention to the recommendations at paragraph 2.1, which are to note progress with updating the code of conduct for members and officers and the gifts and hospitality register, to consider fraud-related performance, including performance indicators for 22-23, as well as a summary of work undertaken within the corporate fraud team for 22-23, and to note progress with the corporate fraud action plan for 22-23. Thanks, and again, happy to take any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. Councillor Meikle-John.
Thank you, Convener. I'm not going to dwell on the documents that have still to be reviewed now and agreed, because we've already mentioned those, and that there's obviously officers understand there's a desire to get that concluded as quickly as possible. What I was going to ask about is the whistleblower and the actions that are outstanding on page 60. from the previous year's plans and what we're doing to close that off. I was also just wondering, in the table we have where there's 18 whistleblowing reportings, 5 of those have been dealt with, but there's still others that are cases that were carried forward, now being finalised, 1 case ongoing. Do we get, have we got any feedback from those whistleblowers? Did they result in anything? Did they result in savings or changes in practice? I just think that the fact that 5 cases were carried forward, now being finalised, it doesn't really tell us anything, doesn't tell us if we've learned something from that. Just wondered if we had any soft information even that could be shared to give the committee assurance. And the other one is around the requests for information and the amount of time that takes up, and if there's anything we can do to mitigate that, because that's obviously a substantial pressure on the service and being able to fulfil those, which we've an obligation to do, but is there another way that could be mitigated in some way? I know that's a wee bit complex, convener, but hopefully that's understood.
Thank you. Isabel.
Yeah. So the first question, I think you were starting maybe with 1 and then you had 2 questions, but I think I can answer them as really as a 1. So with that page 60, paragraphs 4.3 and 4.4, I think that actually answers your question. I know that in terms of giving you examples and information with regards to what those recommendations are, that's very difficult. But I think the assurances that you can take from the work that's undertaken is that there actually were 14 recommendations in the last year, and so far and in 22-23 there were 19 recommendations. So they are all things that are improving our systems of control. So that is examples of maybe where there have been weaknesses. So we may not have found fraud, if you like, in that true sense, or a financial irregularity, but there's obviously things there where there have been weaknesses or gaps operationally where we could make improvements on. So those 14 and those 19 are examples of that, basically. And what we try to do is we keep records as we would an internal audit, and as you would see in the first report about the recommendations outstanding, we are giving you that information here. We're reporting it to you, what is outstanding, and what we do is we go and we speak to the chief officers, the heads of service, and work with them to make sure that these recommendations that haven't been implemented, why haven't they been implemented, when will they be implemented? And I can give you a wee bit of information there in that a couple of the 2 that are outstanding at 4.3, that's more around the process that they've got to go through. So I know, for example, those 2 are to do with contracts, and they are going to the next procurement board to be discussed and either agreed or maybe another option will come up. It could be that something has moved on since they were made, but they're very much on our radar and will be until we've got a result that we're satisfied with. The same could be said with the one at 4.4. I'm just going to check it because I'm sure I've got it here. So yeah, that's a piece of work that's actually a policy that's sitting with the trade unions to be decided. So again, it is a move on, and it is action that is being taken to improve on these things. Sometimes when we carry things forward, it's out with our control within the corporate fraud team. It could be to do with a member of staff being off work, absent from work, for example, and therefore we can't continue on with that investigation or whatever it may be until that changes. So I think hopefully that gives you a wee bit of a flavour for the first question. In terms of the next question about requests for info and the time taken, The work of the corporate fraud team is very much demand led. We never know what we're getting in. So whistleblowers will come to the team, and we, you know, it can be that we've got a lot of work on. It may be that we've got less work on. So what we have in those times when there isn't as many investigations to be done, we have a lot of proactive work going on. And the kind of work that we do with the police and with our own internal services, they aren't resource intensive, so it's not taking up a lot of our time, and we tend to juggle that in amongst all our other work that we're doing. The work with the police specifically, we obviously, it's intelligence work for them, and we are happy to work with them as best we can to provide the information they require, because we also work with them when we are doing our own investigations. So it's not resource intensive, and it's not really anything I would say is a problem for the team to do. Thank you.
Thank you. And convener, just to come back, I'm comfortable with what you're saying, that the outcomes of the investigations have informed process and practice, and indeed potential policy. But is there a way that we could actually have that? Because the key word you've said, that there's been no fraud, and I think that's helpful, but just so that we know and have the assurance that the actions aren't related to fraud, but are more related to our internal practice and processes, and a need for a policy update. Rather, I fully understand you can't be specific because we don't want to identify anything in anyone in particular, but I just think that maybe gives a better overall view, particularly of where these investigations sit. Thank you, convener.
Ms. Will.
Yeah, no problem with that. There's maybe another sentence in there. It's very, this is obviously quite a new report that we've developed, and we are refining it as we go. So trying to give the right level of information without saying too much is difficult. But I think what you're saying is an easy sentence to maybe add on to the end there at 4.3, 4.4.
Thank you, Isabel. Anyone else? I've got one small on the back of that, and it's, whilst I understand completely data protection, as an auditor myself, you are limited what you can disclose. Could it be possible that we can at least learn of any lessons learned going forward? Thank you.
I think it's certainly something to consider. I think there's an issue maybe around, again, the level of information required, because we do have to protect whistleblowers, and if whistleblowers are coming from a service, it may be too directed, but certainly if there is a way of giving you that information around lessons learned, I'll definitely try to do that, of course.
Thank you, Isabel. Is there any more questions, or are we happy now to agree the report? Thank you. We move to the final item.
Thanks, convener. So this is our annual audit plan for the 2022-23 financial year, and it's also year one of the 5-year audit appointment, with Audit Scotland taking over from Ernst & Young as your external auditor. I'm just going to go through the plan and pick out some key bits of information, and I'm happy to take any questions at the end. So if I could just start at Exhibit 1, this sets out our materiality levels for the council and its group accounts when we come to audit the financial statements in July. So there are 3 levels set here, and some information is given on how we use them. Firstly, our planning materiality. So this figure is what we use to assess the overall impact of audit adjustments in the financial statements.
And then moving on to performance materiality, this is the figure that we use if we find any errors. We use this to assess whether we need to do any further audit procedures or adjust our kind of audit plan around certain areas. And then lastly, the reporting threshold. This is the amount that if we identify any errors and they're unadjusted, we would report these to yourselves at this level. So each of those figures are in the last column of that table, but we'll keep these under review, and certainly when we get the unaudited accounts at the end of June, we'll reassess these and see if they need to be adjusted in any way. Then moving down to Exhibit 2. So from our planning work that we've been doing the last couple of months in the risk assessment stage of the audit, we identified risks and then we planned our audit approach around these risks. So in the table, you'll see that there's one significant risk of material misstatement that we've identified, and that's in relation to the risk of material misstatement due to fraud caused by management override of control. So it's a bit of a mouthful. But basically, our auditing standards require us to consider this. And due to the nature of the risk, we're unable to rebut it for any of our audits. So you'll see that risk in every external annual audit plan, and it's just due to the unique nature that unique position that management are in, where they could manipulate the financial statements. But we always plan audit procedures to address that, and you'll see that in the third column, all the different audit activities that we do to get assurance over that risk. Then sticking with risks, but moving down to paragraphs 22 and 23, you'll see other areas of audit focus. So this is where we've identified risks, but we don't consider them to be significant enough to go on the table. So we do still do extra work around these. And you'll see the two areas are the estimations and the valuation of land and buildings, and the estimation and the valuation of pension assets and liabilities. And really it's because there's a huge degree of subjectivity in these valuations. There's estimation and judgment in there, so we need to do some extra work around what goes into that. And that also includes a review of the work of management's experts. So for the non-current asset valuations, that's the valuer, and for the pension assets and liabilities, it would be the actuary. Sticking with the financial statements, paragraph 24 to 28 sets out some information with regards our audit of the group accounts. And I guess the main thing for us to draw your attention to here is just the extra work that we have to do in relation to the insourcing of 2 subsidiary bodies during 2022-23. So with the Falkirk Community Stadium and the Falkirk Community Trust being brought back in-house, we will review the accounting treatment of how that's done in the financial statements, and that's the extra work that we have to do around the group this year. The next section is around the audit, gives some information about the audit of the Falkirk Temperance Trust. Now this is a really small body, there's not a lot happens. The financial statements don't have a lot going on or of not very high values, but because of the legislation we still have to complete an ISA compliant audit. So we've done the risk assessment stage, the materiality and all the rest of it, and we will review the accounts and we'll provide an independent auditor's report to be inserted into those financial statements as well. Moving down from paragraph 33, we'll get some information here about our wider scope audit and our best value work. It sets out our 4 wider scope areas and the work that we're going to do, and it's worth mentioning that this year we are required from our planning guidance to also do some work around climate change and cybersecurity, so reviewing the council's arrangements, what they have in place for both of these areas. And then in terms of best value, previously we would have completed a full best value assurance review at one point in time during our 5-year audit appointment, but the process has now changed in the approach that we now do a thematic review each year. So this year it's on council leadership and setting of priorities following the local elections last May, and that work's well underway. We've already had some meetings and we've got more meetings set up in the next couple of weeks to progress that further. And then just the kind of other thing that I wanted to mention before taking questions was in relation to our timetable and our outputs. So Exhibit 6 sets out our audit outputs for the year, and Exhibit 7 gives us a provisional timetable for the year. A bit of context, I guess, in terms of where we are. We were affected quite a lot by the pandemic in terms of our timescales, and we always signed off councils by the end of September, and that definitely moved back over the last few years. We are trying to work back to getting back to our previous timetables, but some audits were still signed off late last year, which delayed us in getting into our new teams and our new audits this year. So we did start later than we normally would. We are very much aiming for the end of September, but we have to be a bit realistic given that we did start later. So we will be communicating with officers frequently over the next few months, especially once we get into the financial statements audits, to check in and keep in touch about whether it's doable and work through what would need to be done if it wasn't achievable. So it's just to highlight that. I think it would be silly of us to make promises at this point that we would sign off by the end of September. So it's just worth mentioning that. And then the last couple of things, the audit fee is documented at paragraph 50 for the year. And then the other matters section sets out what we're doing in relation to internal audit, independence and objectivity and quality. And then lastly, as we are new to the council, Appendix 1 gives you a wee bit of information about your audit team. Obviously, you're meeting myself here today, and Sarah's joining us through Teams, and Pauline will be along to one of the next meetings to meet you as well. So that just gives you a wee bit of information on that. But I'm happy to take any questions on what I've said or anything I've not mentioned.
Thank you, Julie. Councillor Meikle-John.
Thank you, convener, and I have an understanding, obviously, of the last few years and the delays, but certainly from our perspective, having the final report as close to the September timeline would be really helpful, particularly recognising that if we need to have further actions on that, there'll be a further delay. I was going to ask a wee bit, as you would anticipate, around the audit fee, less about the audit fee for Falkirk Council, but more about the level of the audit fee for the charitable trust, recognising it as a relatively small trust. And I appreciate it's probably not something that you have an awful lot of control over, but to understand how is that set? Is it related to the size of the actual trust fund, or is it just a standard fee?
Yeah, so audit fees are actually set by our audit quality and appointments team, which is another part of the business that we have no involvement in. But in terms of the charitable trust, I recognise that it's incredibly small, and not a lot has happened with that set of accounts in the last couple of years. The issue is that because of the regulations, the legislation, we still have to do an ISA compliant audit on it. So we still have to spend X amount of days in doing that. So there's a full risk assessment process. And then we have to also go through all the quality processes that we have to as well, in terms of reviewing and more senior people involved in that process. So that is kind of the basis of it. I recognise it as very small. We have gone with, well, I know that it's a similar fee to what Ernst & Young charged in the previous year, and where we have applied uplifts and fees for certain audits, we've actually just stuck with the 2,500 for that, rather than uplifting it further this year to try and kind of acknowledge the small size of it. But yes, it is unfortunate that we still have to go through everything we have to, given the size of it.
So you're not being picked on. Ernst & Young got asked the same question.
No, that's fine. I totally recognise it. We've had a lot of questions this year.
But thank you for that.
Councillor Spears.
Thank you. Could you expand on, you're doing an audit on the council leadership following the last election? Obviously, as a leader of a very minority group, the independents, we've been excluded from some committees, so we're really interested and will be more than helpful if you want us to take part in that audit.
Okay. Yeah, so previously the council obviously has a duty to provide best value, and we have a duty to audit it as well. So previously we would have done the full best value, which would have covered leadership and various other elements of the council. The approach now is to do thematic reviews. So this year we're focusing in on leadership and the setting of priorities following the elections. So yes, where we previously would have done focus groups and all that kind of thing, it's because it's a thematic review and there's less days to do that in. It's more of a kind of reviewing minutes, documentation, all that kind of thing. And where we have time, we're reaching out to like the chief executive and everything, for example. I think that there's definitely scope to involve members where possible, but we have to keep it restricted in terms of the times. We haven't made any arrangements yet to meet members for it, and we'll keep that in view. But it's very much looking at how the council sets the priorities, and that they are aligned all the way through the council. So we always talk about a golden thread from like the vision at the top, the priorities, and then all the council's plans. So whether what's set at the top then feeds into the budgets and all the service delivery plans as well. So that's kind of the main focus of it. But definitely we'll keep that in mind as we work through it. We're still at the
because
early
the
stages.
democratic deficit is obviously a concern. It's not just a concern to me, it's a concern to the public. We get asked, what did you say? And we say, oh, wait a minute, we're not allowed to be on that committee. And some of them are quite big: financial strategy, community planning, things like that, where there should be a fair spread of elected members that cross the board.
And we will
But
look
a big thanks to you saying Falkirk Community Stadium and reminding everybody that the stadium's for the whole community. Thank you.
Any further questions? Well, then all it leaves is for me, do we agree this report? Then I'll say thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your attendance today, and I call this meeting to a close. Thank you.